So next we have Dr. Brant Himes of LAPU and Jacob Hanshaw here. I will get them up on the screen. Thank you both for being here today. And today they're going to talk a little bit on how domain experts can shape and refine AI tools. So you'll hear about some evaluation methods and how to ensure outputs are accurate and aligned. This one's a little bit more technical, and I'm excited to hear what you both have to say. So the floor is yours, and thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. Yeah, we're excited to be here. Appreciate you guys taking the time to tune in. We'd love to address your questions too at the end, so get those ready as we move through those. So a quick overview of what we've been working on. We have a grant from the American Bible Society, and we've been creating an AI Bible study tool that we call BibleReflect. It's a tool that we've piloted now in 2 of my Bible courses, and we have some data to share on how we've kind of built this tool. And what's unique about it is how we have set up our parameters and our guardrails to help hone how the AI responds. And so with something like studying the Bible, you get into religion and faith formation. There's a lot of ethical considerations around that. And so we wanted to be very deliberate in how we created this tool. So we're gonna explain a little bit how we used domain experts to help provide the framework for how the AI would respond to student queries. Jacob, why don't you take us through some of our evaluation model that we went through?
Yeah, so we're going to be following a basic 2-part structure here. The first part where we're going to look at the evaluation methods we used, and then the second part where we look at the results. But before I jump in, I want to start with a quick story to kind of frame what we're doing here. So the other day I'm moving into a new apartment, and I was hanging a picture frame. And instead of grabbing a level or anything, I kind of just eyeballed it up there, put it up, and I left to go to school. And I came back in my room. I said, hey, did you take a look at that picture? And then I looked again, and man, it was crooked. It was all the way off, just definitely not in the correct spot. So I think this is a good example, though, of how easy it is to think something that is correct without having an actual reliable way to evaluate it. So really that's what this section is going to be about, is how do we evaluate something like an AI system in a way that we can trust? And as we go through, I'm going to ask the chat a question. Think about this as we go through. How do you typically evaluate things in your life, whether it's LLMs or just anything in general? And would you trust an LLM more if you knew that it was validated specifically for your task? With that in mind, let's head into slide 3 here. All right, so we're looking at ground truth evaluation to start. So early on, common challenge with LLM systems is we didn't have a large labeled data set, but we still needed reliable evaluation. So we used the golden set approach. Essentially, we have a small, high quality set of prompts with expert written reference answers. In this case, we had 2 domain experts, Brant and Reg in this case. And these 2 experts created the golden set. And we had these carefully chosen prompts that kind of aligned with the inductive Bible study method. And then that way each section had a verified and aligned response that we could compare against. And we ran this trial thousands of times, essentially averaging over the scores, and we came up with some pretty good ground truth evaluation scores. And a simple way to think about this is if you were asking someone, if you went to the internet and said, hey, what did I do on my 18th birthday? You could ask the internet and you may get a ton of, varied answers, and definitely not particular to your case. But the most reliable answers would come from people who were actually in the know, right? So your parents, close friends that were there. That's essentially the way we're doing it with this ground truth evaluation. And this gave us a very strong, early signal as well. Were we aligned with the domain expectations? Yes. And where exactly were we failing in the first model selection? And then we can kind of go from there and build up, which leads directly into our 4th slide, where we talk about the RAG triad a bit. And again, as we start to talk through these, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat, and then we'll answer them as well. But so as we scaled, we needed something more automated as we added in context. As we know, context is everything when it comes to agents and LLMs. And then that's where our RAG triad comes in. And it breaks the system into 3 basic parts. We have the query, the retrieved context, and the generated output. And so instead of evaluating the final answer, we evaluate each connection in this triangle, right? We have context relevance, which means, are we retrieving the right information? We have groundedness, which essentially means, is the answer supported by that information? And then we have answer relevance. So does the answer actually address the question? And the way I like to think about this is like asking someone for directions, right? First off, did the person you asked grab the right map, right? Are they looking at the right thing? And then we go, okay, did they actually follow that map while they were explaining the content? And then finally, did their directions get you to where you wanted to go? So that's kind of an analogy way of looking at it. And this also helped us figure out where things went wrong. So we can look at our model and we can see, well, maybe we're messing up with groundedness, so we need to tweak here, or we're messing with the answer relevance, so we need to change the model or prompt in a certain way, or we add different context documents in, guardrails, specific files, that make sure we follow each metric to the best of its ability. And again, that's what makes this powerful, right? Is we have different ways of understanding our model rather than just eyeballing it or looking at generated answers. Yeah. And so now with that in mind, let's quickly move on to the results here and kind of show what we saw in our first run with this. So this is from spring 1. And using the evaluation methods, we looked at the outcomes and we saw statistically significant improvements in scripture engagement. So about a 10-point increase on the SE score provided to us from ABS. And then we went and created our own score as well. And we saw a 0.072 increase on the new weighted score as well. And both had large effect sizes around 1, which is a meaningful shift. Again, we are starting with a smaller data set. We'll add on to this and hopefully see those results kind of get stronger as we start to go through. And even in our regression models, like holding the baseline difference constant, we saw that it was a still significant increase. And if we break it down further, we actually saw that our biggest gains in our own factor analysis was with behavior and frequency. So we're hoping that this can reflect real changes and real frequency increases, not just, basic things as well. Okay. And let's wrap it up. That way we can get into the fun part, which is the demo. So to wrap up, we used ground truth evaluation with the golden set and domain experts to help catch any critical issues early, especially when it came to our guardrails, making sure that the model just didn't go off the rails. And the RAG triad provides a scalable way for us to evaluate the large labeled data sets. And one thing I forgot to mention, but if you're interested in how we did that, we used LLM as a judge, which is maybe something we can talk about more in the Q&A section. And we observed meaningful improvements in engagement, especially in behavior and frequency. That was important from our results section. So again, these evaluation methods don't just measure performance, but they can actually guide us how to improve the system. We've been talking, a theme of the day has been iteration. So that's what we had to do as well. We iterated through each model and we got increasingly better to where we come to now. All right, and I think that's kind of the basics of the tech side. Let's get into our demo.
Yeah, just a couple points I want to draw from you, Jacob. We're on our version 3 right now, so we're in our 3rd iteration. I think that's a really important theme and kind of takeaway from today is to keep working on that. Also, I wondered if you could just speak a little bit about when we did this kind of golden truth set, and we compared it to the AI answers, right? We got like a 0.92 agreement between that. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier how we used LLM as a judge. We essentially, the way this works is we used a platform called TrueLens, which is endorsed by Snowflake. I was actually able to have them present that project to me. And yeah, Brant mentioned the 92% kind of semantic agreement score. So essentially what TrueLens does is behind the hood, we give them our generated query responses from our model. And then we also have our ground truth base set. And it compares those both semantically and using LLM as a judge, so a secondary LLM call that is pretty much designed essentially to compare the two answers. So that way we're not just seeing similarity in words and verbiage, but also in semantics. So is it actually meaning the same thing?
Yeah.
And then after repeated iterations, again, thousands of tests, we saw that we got that 92% score, which we're hoping to improve upon in future iterations as well by getting more domain experts to make it more robust.
Right. Yeah, that's one of our next iterations is adding in additional domain experts, theologian and Bible scholars to answer these ground truth statements and continue to kind of test our AI model. And so that's a really important factor, I think, in just the reliability and the trust that we can have towards this is that we're continually testing it against theologians and scholars. So that's an important, I think, aspect of what we're doing. What's interesting also about let me talk to you. We're going to do a demo here on BibleReflect and tell you a little bit about what's different about this. This is a Bible study tool. And so one thing we wanted to kind of differentiate about this was this is being used in a New Testament class. Students are studying the books of Luke and Acts in the New Testament. And so much of what AI does, just kind of on a generic level, obviously not all the stuff we've been exploring today only, but it often just kind of serves as an answer machine, right? And in this context, we're wanting to teach students how they can learn to read the text closely, how they can reflect on it. There's been a tried and true method of Bible study that's been around for decades called the inductive method of Bible study, and it has 3 basic steps: observation, interpretation, and application. And so we've actually created this model to walk students through those 3 steps. If you'll notice on our kind of opening prompt screen here, there's some different options that students have. They can do this guide me through an inductive Bible study, and this is what they are asked to use for the discussion forum assignments that they have. There's also I want a deep study with explanation and context. So if you're, I've also used this just on my own as I'm studying, preparing for class or teaching or something. And I have a theological question that I want to explore. And so it provides that avenue as well. And then there's a couple other modes that can walk students through different aspects. What I want to do, I'm actually going to take you to a study I did earlier today just to kind of speed things up a little bit. So I clicked on guide me through an inductive Bible study. And it says, I'd be glad to do that. Let's do this inductively, which is what we've trained it to do. It says we need a specific Bible passage to start with, and it can suggest some things. Once you name the passage, I will present it in 2 different translations. I'll guide you through observation, interpretation, and reflection. So I say I want to learn about the Beatitudes. And so first of all, it provides Matthew 5:3-12, the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, a really famous section of scripture. It gives it to me in 2 different English translations. And as I look through these, I notice they're really similar. There's not a whole lot of differences. And it's asked, so it says, well, what does the text say? It asks me to pay attention to words that are repeated, what kinds of people are called blessed, for example. But I go down here and I said, well, can you provide a translation that uses another word than blessed? Because I want to see if there's some differences. And it says, yeah, I can do that. And so it gives it to me in the Common English Bible. And this is a very different translation. Happy are people who are hopeless, because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. And so then it keeps me in this observation mode. Now that you've seen different wording, let's notice. Let's not interpret yet, but let's slow down. How does happy strike you compared to blessed? And then, so I say, well, happy feels simpler, like a simpler word. Blessed seems to carry a lot of meaning, but it can feel abstract. It's surprising that someone who is hopeless would be happy. So it gives me some feedback on that. And then it takes me to the next step, interpretation. What might this mean in context? And it gives me it helps me to think more about what happy means, gives some explanations here. And then it says, it asks me a follow-up question. What are assumptions about happiness challenges you? And I said, being close to God does not have to mean that everything is great all the time. And then it moves me into a reflection phase. It talks about grief, different Beatitudes again. And then it asked me, do I want to keep reflecting, or do I want to maybe learn about some different aspects of it? And I say, well, how did the original audience hear the Beatitudes? So I'm interested in some of the history around it. And then it goes through and provides, again, it takes me back to the text. We really want to continue to draw people back to the text. And so it gives me the Matthew 5:3. And and then gives me some context about the people who were listening to Jesus were economically vulnerable. They were living under Roman occupation, under a heavy tax burden. Yeah, it just gives me, more things to think and reflect on, grounded in these principles that we've asked it to really keep a focus on what's going on in the scripture. It brings me back here to one of the elements that we've trained it on is scripture, interpreting scripture. This is an element and that theologians use to help understand kind of how the Bible works together. And so it brings me back here with continuity with Israel's scriptures, the Old Testament, and draws some things from the Psalms, for example. Yeah, and then it says, here's another question for reflecting. Again, this kind of application now. So I've thought about what the text says. I've learned kind of interpretation about the original context, and now it's asking me about today. Which group do you think would hear them most clearly? Which might find these words unsettling? And I say, I wonder how the homeless today would hear these words. And then it gives me an idea on what the Beatitude would sound like from the street today. Blessed are the poor in spirit again. For someone who's experiencing homelessness, poverty is not a metaphor. It's real. So again, just additional things to think about. And then it keeps asking me if I want to learn more about what this looks like in practice. So I've noticed in my classes, as we're asking students to do these Bible studies and go through these 3 points, each week they have a section of scripture that they draw from. And this has been really interesting, and I would say really effective in how students are engaging and interacting with scripture. We saw from some of those results that Jacob shared, the classes so I have 2 classes that I've used this in and 2 that I'm not. They were our control group. And as we saw in the results, the class that used this, they had a 10.4% increase in how they engage with scripture. So we're using a scripture engagement scale from the American Bible Society, which is a survey that they've been using. And we did a pre and a post survey, and our students that have been using this just report a significant increase in their understanding and then their engagement and how they've been reflecting and applying scripture. And so that's exactly what we're looking for in a situation like this. Yeah. Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, and if I can share some, some basic analytics we have from the students that use Nectar, we've seen over 1,400 messages so far, and the average message per user is around 18. So, wow, it's blown up a bit in these classes, and we can notice that our number one topic right now is the inductive Bible study method being recalled a bunch, and we even have some users surpassing 50, 100, even 200 messages with our BibleReflect version 3. So it's been great to see people using it, getting involved, getting engaged, which is something we designed for, because originally we just didn't want to answer bot. We wanted something that could dive deeper.
Yeah, we wanted to leave time in here I know we're a little early, but we're really curious to hear from people and what questions you have on this. I can show other modes of this if we would like as well. But I think what's unique about what we've been doing is how Jacob specifically talked at the beginning on how this was trained around domain experts and trained to help students walk through a particular style of learning, actually critical thinking. The inductive method is basically a great way to learn critical thinking, right? Paying close attention to a text, learning about its context, and then looking for ways to apply it to your life. So this has been a really encouraging project, and it's something we're continuing to develop. We have a continuing partnership with the American Bible Society to test this more widely in our other classes across the university, and also work with other partners, other churches, and other even Christian schools, and to see how a tool like this could help people engage with Scripture.
Yeah, one thing I want to add too is this is also a nice framework. We use the inductive Bible study method, but there are other methods that we could use and maybe create separate versions, different chatbots that actually do these different methods better. You know what I mean? So we can apply them in different ways as well with this framework that we've kind of used.
Yeah, it's great.
Do we have any questions for Brant or Jacob?
We love questions. We're excited.
Sometimes they take a second to pop up in the comments. So that was a great session, though. I'm really excited about all the work that has been done, and the results seem great. Do you have, I guess, off the top of your head, I know that this is specific to Bible courses, but do you have other ideas for integrating them in different subjects or courses outside of Bible?
Yeah, our next kind of phase of implementation is to make this available across all our classes for all our students and our staff as well. Our next kind of research point will be kind of more widespread usage and see what kind of usage data we get from people and feedback on how it's being used. And so certainly right now it's just in the Luke and Acts classes. We're going to do a little bit of revisions in our Old Testament classes to embed it into those assignments. And then for everyone else, it'll be a resource that's available for them to use on their own.
That's awesome. Jacob, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that? Any other, I guess, integrations?
Yeah, I'm just excited to see from a data side as we start to get more user experience, how can we actually iterate on this tool and use that to kind of inform the next version and the next version that hopefully gets better and better and increasing engagement, and not just in school, but maybe in different groups like Brent said, and across different regions. And that'd be great. That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, it was interesting. The first, in some of the iteration that we learned along the way, in the first version, I can't remember the exact order of how this happened, but one version did the inductive method really well, but we wanted to be able to kind of go off and ask it some deeper questions. And so then we did a second iteration, and then it did kind of this deeper reflection, kind of a deeper theological study really well. And then in version 3, we kind of branched it out and provided those two different options. So you could do an inductive Bible study, or you could do kind of a deep dive theologically. And that's been really fun to have both of those options kind of working out together.
Yeah. I also know you said it's trained on 2 different versions of the Bible, but maybe is that a thought too, to expand that to some of the
I mean, it has access to all the different versions. It's trained to provide 2 translations. And generally it does the NIV and the NRSV, and that's something we can tweak. But you saw I asked it for a different translation, and it was able to pull and provide from that. So that was positive.
Yeah, in that case, it's all about, honing our context into what goal we want as well.
Yeah.
Great. Looks like we have a question here from George. This was great. How will you measure the user experience data to iterate?
Yeah, I'll talk briefly about this one. This is really exciting because with user experience data, we get to see people on their first use, which is almost the most important one, probably the most important one. With our students, we're having them use it in class as a required grade, but we really want to know people's thoughts the second they get their hands on BibleReflect. And with this questionnaire, we can actually see that both qualitatively and quantitatively in our user experience survey. And then we can use that in the future to kind of inform, okay, well, maybe on first look, we actually need to change a couple of things. Maybe it's not approachable the first time, you know what I mean? So certain things we can start to learn more about BibleReflect as we do that.
Yeah, we're excited to use this user experience survey in this next phase of the project to gather more feedback from people that's beyond just kind of the numbers and the usage and their real interactions with it, what they'd like to see.
That's great. Do we have any more questions for Brant or Jacob? can leave that open for a minute. Have you thought about use cases? I know you spoke briefly about expanding this to other institutions, but have you thought about how you could even make this bigger, like maybe turning it into an app or its own site or something like that?
Yeah, so part of our long-term plan and goal with the American Bible Society is to create a standalone app. They would like to see a tool that is useful across kind of the broad spectrum of American churches, which means it needs to have, this is one reason why we focused on the inductive method, is because if you're going to reach a broad spectrum of people and of churches and of theological backgrounds, focusing on the text itself is really powerful. Because I know one thing people will be, even as we've started to reach out to some ministry partners for this next phase, one of the questions is, well, is this a particular perspective of theology? You know, people are rightly kind of protective over, if I use a tool, is it going to align with what with my tradition or not? And so one thing that we're being very deliberate about is creating a tool that draws from this broad spectrum of scholarship, and that also is not pushy and pushing a particular perspective. And so it will, if you ask it some deep dive questions, it'll give you a range of responses from different scholarly perspectives, and then ask you what makes sense to you, what has been your understanding, what questions do you have? So that's an important piece going forward, I think, as well, as we think about kind of broad engagement.
Absolutely. Did you have something to add, Jacob?
Yeah, I'll add on to that too, is that was our original goal as well, is to just get people more engaged. And if we can use AI to do that in a way that they start reflecting on the Bible, the text itself more, that's just great, is what I think.
Yeah, it was interesting. We did a session earlier today with Jeffrey Folks. He's one of our contacts from the American Bible Society, and they've done research recently on Christians' kind of view of AI, and there's a lot of skepticism. And so one of our challenges is going to be overcoming that skepticism. And I think this focus on the inductive method of learning how to read the text closely can overcome a lot of that, because we're intentionally driving people to the text and not just providing a bunch of answers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good strategy. There aren't any other comments coming through at this time. Do either of you have any final thoughts that you want to share?
I would just say, I just encourage people, to continue asking questions and kind of dreaming up ideas. There's great resources available. Obviously, Nectar's been a great partner with us as we've done a lot of different things. And I would say be, user focused. I think for those of us that are in this conversation a lot, it's kind of easy to forget about maybe the hurdles or the skepticism that we still have to overcome, and so we need to be thinking about ways that users can feel safe using, technology like this, where they can feel that it's authentic, that there's humans on the other side of it taking care of how it's being built and used. I think those are some of the mandates that we have going forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and to build on that too, as we start to use these tools, I think, as I mentioned in the beginning, thinking about evaluation can be really important, especially when you're trying to hone in on a specific domain. So if anyone's ever interested in that, I'm always free to talk about that. I love talking about this, so please reach out if you have any cool tech sides to any LLMs or agents that you're doing.
Yeah, and I would just say, that reminds me, kind of my last kind of final thought would be, this is such a great environment to collaborate. I'm the theologian, kind of Bible humanities guy, and to partner with data scientists who get this stuff and get to take some ideas I have about inductive Bible study and figure out how to do it in a way that's really effective. I would say this is such a great opportunity to partner with people across different disciplines. It's been a great opportunity.
Yes, likewise.